Hey guys, welcome to CakeWalk Cambridge. I'm Aisha and today we're going to start with chapter 11, Gas Exchange in Humans. We're officially halfway through the syllabus and I'm quite excited for this one because it comes in many question papers and it is so easy to understand and memorize. So let's get through with this. Okay, so the gas exchange system. So first you need to know how your gas exchange system is adapted to carry out, respiration. So firstly, there is a large surface area that is brought about by your alveoli, which we will learn later. So the large surface area means gases diffuse faster. In chapter 3, we studied that a larger surface area is a key factor that affects the rate of diffusion. So greater the surface area, more gas can pass through in a certain amount of time. So the rate of diffusion is faster. The rate of diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide, those are gases. Then after that, we have a thin surface that is alveoli are one cell thick. So this means that the distance across which gases have to diffuse. Now, when I'm talking about gases, it's only O2 and CO2. So the distance across which gases need to diffuse is smaller. So again, the rate of diffusion is faster. So that makes the gas exchange system more efficient. Then there is a good blood supply. This is because it is surrounded by a network of branching capillaries that ensure that there's always a supply of oxygenated blood. There's always a supply of blood. And the last one is good ventilation with air. So this is basically about maintaining a concentration gradient, a steep concentration gradient. So ventilation is like the movement of gases into and out of the body. So a good ventilation means that there is less oxygen concentration in the deoxygenated blood that surrounds alveoli. So because of that steep concentration gradient, oxygen diffuses from the alveoli into the blood from a higher to lower concentration. Okay. And again, carbon dioxide. So there is a higher proportion of carbon dioxide in the blood than in the alveoli. So carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood to the alveoli. So that's maintaining a steep concentration gradient. I've not really seen a lot of questions that ask you to explain these adaptations, but you should be able to understand them extremely clearly. Okay. Okay, now this is basically a gas exchange system. You should be able to label and identify all of these parts. So first you have the trachea, and above the trachea you have the larynx, which is like the voice box. So air passes through the nostrils, through the larynx, then it enters the trachea, which is basically a windpipe, but the scientific name is the trachea. The trachea branches into two structures called the bronchus. So bronchi is the plural form of bronchus. So you have the right bronchus and the left bronchus. So we will look at the right side first. The bronchus then divides into bronchioles, which are like thinner branches. Okay, and at the ends of these bronchioles, you have alveoli, as you can see here. Okay, so now these alveoli are one cell thick. They have a moist epithelial lining. So why is it moist? Because the rate of diffusion is faster. Now, why is that? Because there are spaces, significant spaces between molecules in a liquid than molecules in a solid. So because the lining is moist, the spaces allow a faster rate of diffusion of gases. Okay, so it's a moist lining. It's only one cell thick. There are a million of alveoli present all over the surface, so that again includes the surface area as well. And then you have the diaphragm, which is this structure over here. You will learn about the diaphragm in like the next few slides. It's got an important role in breathing. You have the heart, which is usually present around here, more towards your left side than right side, not exactly your center. And then you have your ribs. Now, this main function of the ribs is to allow the lungs to expand, like allow ventilation, and to protect internal organs like the heart and lungs. And then you have the intercostal muscles over here on this lining. You will, again, so these are new names, so you'll probably know the trachea, alveoli, bronchus, ribs, etc. But the intercostal muscles are a new structure that we're going to learn about, their role is quite important, and you should be able to like understand what the role they play in gas exchange. So that is basically the diagram that you need to know by heart. Okay, so now this is we're gonna like learn about the intercostal muscles right now. So here, okay, you have the internal intercostal muscle. There are two types, internal and external. As you can see, internal is covered by external. So the internal is inward and the external is outward. So the internal intercostal muscles and the external intercostal muscles. Here you have the sternum, which is a bone that holds the ribs together. These are the ribs. Okay, and here in between the ribs, you have the internal and external intercostal muscles. So the external intercostal muscles are this shape and they're around here, and the internal intercostal muscles are here. So you should be able to identify both of these separately on a diagram, but very often they ask you to only label the intercostal muscles, like they don't specify the type. So that should have you like sorted, because that's relatively way easier. Okay, so now this is basically how your gas exchange system works. Okay, so in chapter 11 and 12 in biology, basically deoxygenated blood is always symbolized or like implied with blue color, and oxygenated blood is red color. So let's just keep that in mind. Okay, so this is like a capillary. So deoxygenated blood flows through the capillary. As it passes the surface of the alveoli, carbon dioxide from the deoxygenated blood diffuses from a higher concentration gradient, that is the red blood cells here, the blood cells here, to a lower concentration gradient, that is the alveolus, as a result of its random motion, okay, down the concentration gradient. And when this happens, oxygen from the alveoli diffuses from a higher concentration gradient to a lower concentration gradient, that is the red blood cells, as a result of its random motion. Okay, so it diffuses across the membrane, the epithelial lining, and into the red blood cells. So this is how it slowly transforms the blood from being blue, that is deoxygenated or impure, to pure or oxygenated or red if we have to color it in. And that's how, and your oxygenated blood leaves the capillary, enters arteries, and it goes back into the it enters the pulmonary vein and comes back to the heart. So this is basically what happens at your alveolus. And now we're going to look at as a whole how the gas exchange system works. So from the blood, you have deoxygenated blood from the body, that enters the heart. Okay, we've done this in chapter 9 as well. I just forgot. So we've done this in chapter 9, so you shouldn't have an issue with this diagram. It's so simple. But just to put it into context, or if you've not done chapter 9, you can do this now first. Okay, so deoxygenated blood from the body enters the heart via the vena cava. It enters the right atrium. Then it passes through the tricuspid valve and enters the right ventricle. The ventricles contract and it passes through the semilunar valve, and the deoxygenated blood enters the pulmonary artery, which carries it away from the heart towards the lungs. This is what happens at the lungs, at the alveolus in lungs. Okay, after this, oxygenated blood goes to the pulmonary vein and it is then returned to the heart, the left atrium. The left atrium then contracts and the bicuspid valve opens. Blood enters the left ventricle, which then contracts. It has thick muscles, thick wall, so it can pump blood over a greater distance. Not more blood, same volume of blood over a greater distance. And the semilunar valves open, and the blood is transported to the aorta, which then pumps the oxygenated blood to the different organs in the body. So this is basically a simplified version of your gas exchange system. Okay, now we're going to go through the different structures in your gas exchange system and their functions. These are extremely important and could come for around 6 marks. First, you have cartilage. Cartilage can form like Cartilage can form C-shaped rings of cartilage. So these help to support the trachea while allowing it to move and flex while breathing. So basically your trachea moves while breathing, because when you're breathing, your gas exchange system undergoes some sort of movement to allow ventilation of the lungs. So the cartilage helps support the trachea. It provides like a backbone that that structure that helps it to move, okay, but like not lose its shape completely. So that is the function of the cartilage. Then you have the ribs, which we've already discussed. One is to protect internal organs like the heart and lungs, and two is to allow movement of the lungs, which we will again look at in the next slide or two. Then you have mucus. Mucus is secreted by goblet cells. This is extremely important to know. So goblet cells secrete mucus. Mucus is a thick, sticky liquid. This liquid traps pathogens and dust particles. Okay, and when you cough, or basically like when you cough, you feel like that phlegmy kind of thing. That's mucus. So basically, you have ciliated cells, as mentioned here. These have cilia, which are like projections, hair-like structures, which beat or move to and fro to move this mucus towards the throat, which can then be swallowed. Okay, so mucus is also important in the alimentary canal, where it prevents wear and tear of the canal and also prevents it from facing enzyme attack and attack by pathogens. So mucus is a very important part of your body. You should know it is secreted by goblet cells, and it works with ciliated cells. It traps pathogens. You get like 3 to 4 marks just for mentioning this. It's a thick, sticky liquid. Okay, moving on. Okay, now this is basically how your gas exchange system works. Trust me, it is much easier than it looks. So this table basically summarizes everything that you should know for MCQs and your theory. Not really important for ATP, but I will give you an example of where you can use it then. Okay, so basically inspiration is breathing in and expiration is breathing out, like respiring in, respiring out. So inspiration, when you inspire, obviously your lungs expand. Why do your lungs expand? Because a greater volume of air is entering your gas exchange system. So your lungs have to adjust to accommodate that air, that extra volume of air. So your lungs expand. Now your diaphragm, as mentioned below, is present right below your lungs. So when your lungs expand, your diaphragm has to allow the expansion. So how exactly will it allow the expansion? It will flatten. So your diaphragm flattens, your lungs expand. As you know, your lungs expand, so what has to increase? Volume has to increase. And if you've studied physics, you should know an increase in volume results in a decrease in pressure because there are less particles per unit volume, which means less collisions with the surface of the walls, with the particles themselves, and so less pressure overall. So greater volume, less pressure. And now this part does not relate to these. It's just related directly to inspiration and expiration. So during inspiration, your internal intercostal muscles relax and your external intercostal muscles contract. Now these last two things you just have to memorize. There's no real like logic I can explain to you at this stage. I'm sure it gets more complicated later on and there's like a perfectly understandable reason as to why this happens. But when you inspire, you just need to remember, like I remember it this way. Inspiration, so internal intercostal muscles relax. Expiration, so external intercostal muscles relax. Okay, so expiration, external. Inspiration, internal, and those relax when it happens. And you also need to know the internal intercostal muscles and external intercostal muscles are an antagonistic pair of muscles, which means they work oppositely, like your biceps and triceps. When your bicep contracts, tricep relaxes. Tricep contracts, bicep relaxes. So I'm just going to go over inspiration one last time. So inspiration, you breathe air in, lungs expand, diaphragm flattens, volume increases, pressure decreases, internal intercostal muscles relax, and external intercostal muscles contract. Now in expiration, it's just the opposite. Your lungs contract because you're breathing air out. Your diaphragm becomes dome-shaped again. Dome-shaped is an important keyword. It is perfect to use. Okay, so it becomes dome-shaped again, which is basically like this. Okay, like if these are your lungs over here, like the bottom of your lungs. When they contract, it becomes dome-shaped, and when they expand, it flattens. Okay. Volume obviously decreases, so more particles per unit volume. So the pressure increases, internal intercostal muscles this time contract, and your external intercostal muscles relax. You have to remember this because especially the last two are important for structured questions where they ask you to fill in tables. And pressure and volume are most important for MCQs, where they ask you when pressure increases and when volume increases. Just remember they're inversely related, and inspiration causes an increase in volume. Then you'll remember everything else. This is also important for your structure. And for ATP now, if you are ever asked to calculate the volume of air in lungs given the pressure or something like that, just remember pressure and volume are inversely related. So that's your application of volume and pressure in ATP. Okay, now this is the components of your inspired air versus the components of your expired air. I am very good at mugging up stuff, so this seemed to be really easy for me, but there are a lot of kids who didn't really do well in this kind of segment. So let's try and get through this. So nitrogen, okay, basically there's 78% nitrogen in the air, and it's also the same concentration in your expired air and inspired air. So 78 remains the same because no nitrogen is consumed by the body from the air, none at all. So it remains the same. It comes in MCQs and structured, so be careful about this one. Oxygen, there's 21% oxygen in the air. So when you inspire your air, there's 21% oxygen in it. But the body uses this oxygen, okay, for your gas exchange system and for respiration, basically. So it uses only 4% of this oxygen. So 16% oxygen is expired out. Then carbon dioxide, there's 0.04% carbon dioxide in the air. When you breathe in, you have the same amount. When you breathe out, it it increases by 100 times. This is because your body is respiring aerobically, so carbon dioxide is produced as a waste product. So the percentage of the concentration of carbon dioxide in the air increases. Okay. Then you have water vapor, so it's variable, which means the amount is not really known, but it's a much less amount than what is expired. When it's expired, it is saturated. So very often you have MCQs and structured questions that ask you to name gases that are in a greater concentration of expired air than in inspired air. So your answers can only and only be carbon dioxide and water vapor. Those are the only two answers, as you can see, because it increases by 100 times, and from variable it increases to saturated. Okay, oxygen decreases and nitrogen remains constant. Now, lime water, if you've done chemistry, you should have done it before, is an indicator for carbon dioxide. So in the presence of carbon dioxide, it turns a cloudy white. Now, why? Because it combines, so lime water is CaOH twice, calcium hydroxide. So it combines with carbon dioxide to form calcium carbonate and water. Calcium carbonate is a white precipitate. So this is what causes lime water to turn cloudy. It's the white precipitate of calcium carbonate. So a greater carbon dioxide concentration will cause it to turn cloudy faster and become whiter, like more white, because more of it is reacting, the reaction is faster, etc. And after some time, when too much carbon dioxide is passed through this lime water, the lime water becomes clear again. Now why? Because the calcium carbonate formed reacts with excess carbon dioxide to form calcium hydrogen carbonate, which is transparent. So which is clear. So it becomes clear again, the solution. Okay. So this is basically what you need to learn. So if you have one jar of lime water that is testing inspired air, it's going to be very weakly cloudy. But if you have another jar that is testing expired air, it's going to be like a dark cloudy white. Because expired air has 100 times more carbon dioxide concentration than inspired air. This has come in an ATP before. I think an O-levels paper, but it was given to me for my mock exam, where I was supposed to investigate carbon dioxide concentration and lime water as one of the experiments. And then there are other questions that ask you to calculate the volume of carbon dioxide in an expired and inspired air. Just remember, expired air always has more carbon dioxide concentration than inspired air, and memorize this value. It may not always be the same value in your calculations because it depends on the actual original figures given, but it's always useful to have a rough idea of the average amount, the average concentration. Okay, and this is your last segment of the chapter. Explain the link between physical activity and rate and depth of breathing in terms. Okay, so basically, physical activity, let's look at a sport, for example, football. I love football, so let's look at that. So football is a form of physical activity. If you're playing a sport like football, or if you're running on a field for like an hour, after some time, if you like touch your neck, you can feel a pulse throbbing in your neck. Okay. Now, and you can feel your breathing has increased. You breathe faster, deeper, you can hear it. Okay, all of this happens. Why? I'm going to explain. So when you're involved in some sort of physical activity, there's a greater demand for oxygen by your muscles because your muscles are working faster and working more. So there's a greater, so when so muscles need energy to work, right? Now what causes, what provides, good word, provides, what provides this energy? This energy is provided by aerobic respiration. Now aerobic respiration, keyword in this term is aerobic, which means it occurs in the presence of oxygen. So oxygen is required for energy to be released. So what happens is, when you're involved in a some sort of physical activity, your muscles work faster, so greater demand for oxygen is created. So your rate of breathing increase, which means your the number of breaths you take per minute increase, and the depth of breathing increases, which means you breathe in a greater volume of air. Okay, like if you had to like show this on a graph, so this was your graph for rate of breathing. If this is your rate of breathing, like earlier, your rate of breathing would probably increase to this for exercise. Okay, so normal and exercise. Now, if we're going to look at depth of breathing, we're going to look at it in like wave form. So this is going to be the volume of, this is going to be the time, and this is going to be the volume of air on your y-axis. So if this is your normal depth of breathing, okay, your depth of breathing during exercise is going to be this. Okay, and you can also see the rate of breathing has increased. So in the red line, you can see there are 3 waves, but in the yellow line, there are 4 waves. So more number of waves in the same amount of time means the rate of breathing, number of breaths per minute has increased. And the depth of breathing has increased because the amplitude of the wave has increased. Look, this is much bigger than this, okay? There's a huge difference. So that's your rate and depth of breathing. Now, basically what happens is when your muscles are working faster, there's a greater production of carbon dioxide in your blood. So carbon dioxide in acid form, like if you dissolve it in water, is weakly acidic. So it forms carbonic acid. So when there's a greater concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood, there's a greater, your blood pH decreases because of an increase in carbonic acid. Now this lower pH is detected by the brain. So the brain instructs you to breathe faster and deeper because it has to bring the body back to its original pH, bring the blood back to its original pH. There's a concept called homeostasis, whatever you call it, which is basically about maintaining a constant internal environment. That is, certain values of the body, like your hemoglobin count, your blood sugar count, your temperature, your pH have to be within fixed limits, set limits. So when the brain detects a variation in these counts or values, a stark variation, its function is to bring back the body, the values back to their original ranges. So when there's an increase, when there's a lower pH, the brain immediately is stimulated to cause to instruct the body to breathe faster and deeper. Okay, so basically this was chapter 11. Chapter 12 gets a little more complicated when it comes to the oxygen debt, etc. But it's just a continuation, so I suggest you study chapter 11 and 12 together. They're both relatively small and quite simple, to be honest. But yeah, that was chapter 11. I hope this helped you. If you have any questions, you can always email me. Feel free, don't worry, I'm always there for you. And please like, share, subscribe, and comment on this video. It would mean a lot to me. Let's get through this together.